allow them to join us. I'm recording tonight, so I'll post that on YouTube tonight, and people can look at it as they want. I just started the recording, so this is our last Tuesday night study on the letters, so-called letters of John. We'll be looking at Second and Third John. Third John, the shortest book in the New Testament, and actually, I think it's the shortest book in the Bible, in our Bible. But we'll be looking at both of those tonight. And so, kind of as we have been doing, I think it may be better for me as I was looking through this a little bit yesterday and then again today. There's sort of are they're not really complicated, but there may be a lot of questions. We were teasing about it, but that I probably don't have the answer for because no one does. But I thought actually, instead of going through and spending a whole bunch of time with it, as I was looking at various commentaries, and you should have, just as kind of a helpful thing, the outline I sent you yesterday, just so you can see kind of the outlines of these two. Now, these are clearly, both of these are letters. They are personal letters from an individual, which is very different from what we saw in First John. It was a much broader letter to a broader, non-specified audience. Here we and in First John, remember there was no uh, name or title or any kind of idea of who was writing the uh, the letter or the writing. Here we have in both Second and Third John, the writer refers to himself as elder. That Greek word presbyteros. He is the elder, and he's writing to first a probably a sister church, one of the other churches of the area. It appears that the author may have some kind of, this is sort of a precursor because presbyter then in time became more recognized as an officer in the church. So the writer of both of these letters is undoubtedly the same person. May not be the same person that wrote First John, definitely not the person that wrote the Gospel of John or Revelation. But it seems pretty clear that Second and Third John are both written by this presbyter, this elder. The first of these, Second John, is written to a sister church, as it says, to the elect lady, kind of a reference to the idea of the church as the bride of Christ. Um, and then the second letter, Third John, is written to a person named Gaius. So I thought, as I was looking through all this, trying to take notes, and then I went back to, this is why you have a good study Bible sometimes, because this Oxford annotated Bible that I use, each book has its own introduction. And this is just kind of a very clear introduction to the second and third letter of John. So I'm just going to read it, what's written here, with a couple comments, and then just kind of open it up to answer your questions as you've read Second John and to have any clarifications. We'll do the same with Third John, open it up to questions or comments or perspectives or things that you found helpful that you want to share. And then if we have any time left after that, we could sort of circle back to the larger book of First John if you still have things that were unresolved in the last couple of studies that we've done. Does that sound like a good kind of plan for our night tonight?
Mhm.
Okay. So this is just a good introduction. It says a copy of First John may have actually even accompanied this letter, which instructs its addressees not to associate with the dissidents, with those who have gone out from us that we read about in First John. The tone of the admonitions indicates that the author was well known to the readers and was one whose spiritual authority they acknowledged. Unlike First John, which appears to have been addressed to several churches, this letter was written to one specific church, probably one of the churches of Asia Minor. The letter yields no definite evidence regarding date, though we had said, it would probably be after the year 100 in the first introductory session we had when we talked about all three of these books. The kinship of situation and ideas with those reflected in First John suggests a date around the end of the first century or beginning of the second century. The author alludes to the main teaching of First John about loving one another and adds a command not to show hospitality to false teachers. Anyone who does so is guilty of participation in their evil teaching. So in this short letter, again, the elder is writing and talking about these antichrists, these false teachers that are coming into their area. And the primary false teaching they are doing is they are teaching that Jesus was not a human person. They're saying Jesus did not come in the flesh. That's so important for the writer of First John and Second and Third John. That's kind of the main uh, teaching, or sometimes translations use the word doctrine, that they are disputing, that Jesus didn't come in the flesh. He was not a human being. And then the other piece of that, as alluding back to First John, is the idea that these false teachers, not only by their teachings that they don't believe in Jesus as a human being, but they also, again, are not living that commandment of love. And that comes up in this Second John as well. And he specifically says that you should not give hospitality to these people that are coming in. And I want to say a little bit more about that. Part of the Christian tradition is steeped in the Hebrew tradition. And the ancient Hebrew tradition has a very specific code of hospitality, because these people were nomadic peoples, largely living in desert country. And it's not just the Hebrew people. That's sort of in the antiquities, that when a stranger is traveling through, um, most of the time there were no restaurants or hotels or places to stay. And so when someone came near your place or came into your town, and this really was I don't want to get too far off track, but that's really when we talk about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And there's this whole idea that, the towns were destroyed because they were filled with homosexuals and immoral people. Really, the problem with Sodom and Gomorrah was a lack of hospitality and violence. And we see that in other passages of scripture writing about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's this tradition of hospitality. And Jesus himself says to his followers when he sends them out, you need to rely on the hospitality of people. And when you come into a house, offer to them and to the house your peace, your calm and your sense of giving blessing to the house. If they don't listen to you, if they're not interested in what you're doing, then shake the dust off of your feet and go to another village. He doesn't mean that as an insulting way, or but he's just basically saying if they're not going to hear your message, then just move on to someone else. So there's this deep rooted tradition within the Hebrew community and then within the Christian community of hospitality, of caring for the stranger, caring for the person who comes into your midst. And Paul writes about this as well. So the writer here is saying to this church, you have some people coming into your community who are saying things that are not true. They are false teachings and they're trying to lead us astray. They are filled with the spirit of Antichrist, as he says. They are Antichrist, primarily in two things. They're not doing the commandments of loving one another, and they're teaching that Jesus was not a flesh and blood human being. Those are the two things he has against those people. And he says to this church that he's writing to, so don't offer those people hospitality, which is really, as I was reflecting on it this evening, I was thinking, a lot of times as a progressive church, as an open-minded church, and we say everyone is welcome, everyone is welcome. This letter tells us, well, not everyone is welcome. And I referred to it before, I think I referred to it in my sermon Sunday about the young man who came in several years ago at the close of church. He had a message that was antichrist to our way of thinking. And so we welcomed him, we let him have his say, and then we said, okay, graciously, we are not extending any more hospitality to you. We believe differently than you do. We let you share your opinion. Now we're asking you kindly to leave, and he did, and it was handled very well. But I think that sometimes is a hang up for us, and we've talked about that. That well, we're supposed to be open to everybody, so we should just accept everybody if they're coming in with a really conservative message that's not in the spirit of Jesus as we understand. If they have issues about LGBTQ or women's rights or people of color and just some of these things that have been real issues for us to stand up for. Um, we don't have to say, sure, everyone is welcome and you can come in with your ideas that are hateful and bigoted and hurtful. There are things that we can say no. We we love you. God loves you, but you can't come and be a part of this if you're going to bring the hatred, the bigotry, the non-Christian, the lack of loving one another that the writer here is talking about. So very short letter, but that's kind of it in summary. As you have read through Second John, do you have some specific verses or words or just things that are problematic that maybe we can clear up together tonight?
How do you know when to say no? Because there's a lot of people that, they talk, this is the way it should be, but I don't believe them. But I don't think I'm strong enough to say you can't be here, or,
Yeah, I think it's certainly in any situation, if we bring it down to our current times and the world that we're living in, it would have to be a case by case situation. I, and I can only speak from my experience, and my experience is that generally, when people come to the kind of church we are, or the kinds of churches that I have pastored, they hear the preaching for a while, they hear the discussions, and they kind of make up their own minds. And we have seen that in the going on, starting my 8th year this year. In the 7+ years that I've been here, we've seen people who've come, and then at some point they either say directly to me, in some instances, I just think I disagree with what you're saying, and I'm looking for a more traditional church, or sometimes they just kind of wander away. There are cases, the one I just pointed out about the young man, where we just had to say, we don't believe that way, and we're not going to let you come in and say those kinds of hateful, hurtful things. And I think that, again, going back to Second and Third John and First John, goes back to his main point of, if you call yourself a follower of Jesus, you have to love one another. And if you have someone coming into the community that isn't doing that, um, that becomes the difficulty of sort of being judgmental, maybe. As we've talked about, some of the language of these letters makes us feel a little judgy. But we also have to think about the well-being of the whole people, which is one of the things, shortly after I came here, where we took our open and affirming statement and our just peace statement and put it on the front of the bulletin to say that this is who we are. And if this resonates with you, if this is the kind of faith journey you believe in and that you live, there's a home for you here. If it's not, and we've seen that too, people come to the worship service and their church hadn't even started. They're looking at the bulletin and they're poking their husband or wife and pointing at that opening statement, and that we've seen them just get up and walk out before church even starts, because they recognize that this is not the place for them. And so I think it kind of, at least in our modern world, it seems to kind of work itself out more than like the pastor or the leaders of the church coming together and kicking someone out. I think it more becomes a conversation of, well, I don't believe that way. I'm not comfortable here. I love the people, or whatever the case may be. They kind of um, drift away and find a place where they would be more comfortable.
So, how were these letters delivered and how long did it take? And it seems to me that if it's walked or on a camel, that it would have been months before these letters would come. And by the time the letter got there, some of these situations would have either taken over or been extinguished. How does that work?
Well, these are, when you look at a Bible map, this sort of Johannine community, we talked about the churches of Asia Minor.
Mhm.
If you look at a Bible map, where you can see like the church at Ephesus, the church at Smyrna, the church at Thyatira, they're all actually relatively close to one another. And so it wouldn't be months and months. It would be a matter of a few days, probably someone walking. This is in the ancient times. You did have to kind of rely on either saying to one of your servants or to someone who's, for instance, here, someone who's in this church. And in third John, it mentions a person, Demetrius,
Mhm.
and the indication is that Demetrius is bringing this letter to Gaius, and so it serves twofold. It has the message for Gaius about what's happening in the church there, but it also has at the end sort of a recommendation that I commend Demetrius to you. He's a good, loving person, so offer him hospitality. So it's also kind of a letter of recommendation.
Mhm.
So yeah, these letters would have been carried by individuals. Sometimes in the antiquities, you know, Sister Carol is going to go see her Aunt Lulu over in Ephesus, and so hey Carol, when you're going, here's this letter that I want to send to the church in Ephesus. Will you take it with you and present it to them, and they can read it in the community there as they worship together. So it wouldn't have been kind of, we're not talking about the whole Middle East or camel journeys, but really, and these were people. It's funny because we live in such a car transportation society, but even to this day, many African, remote African cultures, they think nothing of walking 30 miles to get somewhere in a day. Just, oh, I've got to go to town to get some stuff. So I'm going to walk 15 miles to town and get some stuff. I might stay the night, I might not, and then walking back. So these are people that could pretty regularly walk 20 to 30 miles without any problem. Um, we don't really do that in our, in our or I don't do that. So yeah, it would not have been like you were asking about the months and months of time between when things were happening, but more like in this instance, maybe just over a period of time in which he's hearing about this. This is going on. He's writing a letter, maybe just in a matter of a few weeks about what's happening as he's heard about the situation.
And the other thing that is, I think, amusing is I have a lot to tell you. I don't want to use paper and ink. And he says that in the next one, too.
Yeah.
So why does he bother even saying that?
This is a boy, my mind just went blank. This was the normal thing for a personal letter, and you see this too in I think it might be in the letters of First and Second Timothy and Titus. You see the writer there saying something like that. Not in all of them, but so it's sort of a convention. That's what I'm thinking of. It's a literary convention of the time that we've talked about. Sort of the form of the letter. You have a kind of formal salutation. Usually says in the Christian community, "Grace and peace to you." In this one, notice John adds something about truth and love in Jesus as well. He's got to get that truth about who Jesus is and the love piece. So he adds that to the normal salutation. So the greeting at the end, which I never really thought about that, but that was a couple commentators said that this in this time frame, most personal letters ended with that. That was kind of a, like we would say, sincerely or respectfully, they would have this thing of, I have so much more to tell you, but I don't want to use pen and ink. And it's interesting too, it says, most translations say, but I would rather do it, I think he says face to face.
Mhm.
And literally in the Greek, it's a Greek idiom, and literally in the Greek it says mouth to mouth. I want to speak to your mouth, and your mouth is going to speak to me. And in English, if we said I want to do this mouth to mouth, we would think, CPR. Is he talking about kissing? But it's in our syntax or grammar, we would say face to face. But yeah, that's actually a very that's how most people ended their letters. It's kind of a thing of like, what we might say too. I have so much more to tell you. We wouldn't say the pen and ink maybe, but I have so much more to tell you, but I would rather tell you face to face than in a Zoom meeting. Other things about this second John. Again, themes of loving one another, caring for one another, and speaking of the truth. As he says in verse 7, many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is the deceiver and the antichrist. So again, he is saying, when those people come into your town, it's okay for you to say, I'm not putting you up for the night, because I know you're stirring up trouble and you're coming from a completely different place. And so just move along and find someone else, which is kind of a harsh thing to say. But he does say that in this letter. And sort of the reverse happens in 3 John, when the letter is sent to Gaius and it's talking about Diotrephes. And we'll go ahead and move into 3 John. 3 John is dealing with some very similar things, but it's a more personal letter. We don't know anything about Gaius. Seems like he's probably a leader in that church. And we don't know anything about Diotrephes, except that what he's doing basically is what the writer says not to do in 2 John. And that is that Gaius is withholding hospitality from true Christian believers who are saying and doing the right thing, and offering hospitality to those who aren't. And so in 3 John, he's saying to Gaius, don't allow Diotrephes to do this. And as he says, I've written to Diotrephes, I've reached out to him, and he is not responding to me. And he has some kind of we would say snarky things to say a little bit about. I need to turn the page here in my Bible. Some snarky things about Diotrephes in verse 9. This is now 3 John. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will call attention to what he's doing in spreading false charges against us. And not content with those charges, he refuses to welcome the friends and even prevents those who want to do so and expels them from the church. This idea of friends, and I'm not sure what your translations say. He talks about friends, and that is in the Greek the word brother. But then in another place where he talks about friends, he is talking, it's a different word. And he's talking basically about people who are part of the community of faith, the Christian community of faith. Diotrephes is not giving them hospitality like he's supposed to be, but he is giving hospitality to those whom he's not supposed to. So it's sort of a follow-up. I think, to go back to your initial question, Carol, if for the sake of argument, the same person wrote all 3 of these, even though the longer one, 1 John, is not really a letter, there is this sort of progression, and especially with 2 and 3 John, it would appear that the writer, that it's a letter that's lost to us, or maybe he's actually referring to 2 John when he says, I have written to the church. It may be a reference back to 2 John, or it may be another letter that he wrote specifically to Diotrephes, who is maybe a higher up leader in the church, or a person of more stature in the church than Gaius is. And so the writer's saying to Gaius, I'm trying to do the right thing, but Diotrephes isn't doing it, and I'm counting on you to do that and to welcome Gaius, who's bringing you this letter, or Demetrius, who's bringing you this letter, who is coming as a missionary, as a helper, as a worker, and needs your hospitality, and is someone who does not have the spirit of Antichrist, but does have the true teaching. And again, we're not talking about the whole of Christian theology. When this is the reason, to be very specific, when we look at a letter, we could look at some of these verses and say, oh, well, they're talking about the teaching of Jesus. They're talking about, the virgin birth, the Sermon on the Mount, the miracles that he did, all the stuff in the Gospels, everything about him, all the doctrines and teachings. He's just talking about, when he's talking about the true teaching, he's talking about Jesus in the flesh and loving one another. He's being very narrow about that understanding, to kind of parse out who are the people that are of us, to use a language that comes in First John, and who are those who have gone out from us, who have that spirit of Antichrist. I'm talking way more than I thought that I would.
My,
Occupational hazard.
yeah, the common English version says brothers and sisters instead of friends.
Yeah, I want to. This is in 3rd John, right?
Yep.
So we've got part of what happens, and this goes back to what we've talked about in terms of transmission of the original text and translating it into English, and in later days with the Common English Bible and the NRSV trying to be more inclusive, that they will take a word like brothers, which is talking about people within the church, and in that context it was not a gender thing. It's not like you only have to care for brothers. So the NRSV and some others will say brothers and sisters, or in some translations they will say believers, to have a non-gender thing about, these are basically people in the faith community. In the Greek text it says, and I want to see which verse were you just quoting?
9, 3 John 9.
Yeah, in this one,
10.
okay, yeah, that would make more sense. Verse 10. Yeah, I'm looking. Therefore, neither receives. Yeah, it is. So there it is, brothers, adelphos. But you could use a non-gender brothers and sisters, or as I said in this translation, I think it does use in the NRSV it does use friends. There's a footnote saying brothers. However, later on we see in verse 14 and 15, according to this translation. Peace to you. The friends send you their greetings. Greet the friends there, each by my name.
And says friends here too.
Yeah, and in the Greek, it is the word philos.
Okay.
City of brotherly love, it's a brotherly love, but philos is kind of that friend kind of word. So it does use the word friend there specifically, as well as brothers. So either way, it's kind of like, this is a weird way of expressing it. But one of my guilty pleasures is like The Godfather, mafia movies, Goodfellas, things like that. And in the mafia, when you come with your mafia people and you say, if you say that someone is like part of the family, what you say is, yeah, Mike's a friend of ours. And that tells everybody, okay, he's not a civilian. He's part of the club. He's, a made person in the mafia by saying, yeah, if he's not, then they would say, oh yeah, Mike's a good fella. So he's okay, but he's not really with us. So that may not be a good way to think of the Christian community. But it's a way of him recommending again, saying, these people are our friends. They are part of the faith, and these people who are then coming to help as missionaries. That's how, again, you kind of differentiate between those who are coming in as false teachers, who are teaching the wrong thing, and also back to First John, not living in loving ways. Those are the two. The back to the beginning where he says, "I greet you with the love and the truth." Those are the two important things for the writer of these two books. So a narrow, as with all the letters that we find in the New Testament, a narrow focus really to a situation happening in a church. And we may find analogous situations in the world we live in and in our churches, but we can't just say, oh, this is clearly a blanket statement for all Christians at all times in all places. That it is helpful for us, but not always completely instructive. Dee, were you? Okay. Any other?
I have another one, but I don't want to take over.
Sure. No, I mean, this is kind of an interesting way of doing this, and I think I kind of like doing it this way of just responding, because if I just talk, I'll talk about all kinds of things that may not be interesting or important, and so I would rather hear the things that you got out of it and clarify things if I can, if I need to. So I don't think anyone's going to be upset if you ask another question, Kara.
Okay. In 3 John, the brothers and sisters have arrived. And in verse 7, it says, they left on their journey for the sake of Jesus Christ without accepting any support from the Gentiles. And I know who the Gentiles are, but what does that statement mean, without any support of the Gentiles?
Pagans. Mine says pagans.
Pagans?
That's what mine says.
Really?
No help from the pagans.
And this translation, the NRSV says non-believers.
Oh,
And mine is a New International Version.
I need to look at that. 3 John, tell me again what verse you're looking at.
7.
Verse 7. So yeah, in the Greek text,
Gentiles.
on behalf of the name, they went
King James is Gentiles.
from the Gentiles. Yeah, Gentiles in the Greek word, in the Greek language, it's the word ethnikos, from which we get ethnicities. It's sometimes translated as heathen, as pagan, as unbeliever, or as Gentiles, depending on the context. So in this case, it's being used euphemistically as people who are outside the church. It's kind of, how Amish people who really came out of traditions of German nations talk about like they would say of all of us that we're English. That's what Amish people call non-Amish people.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're from Mexico, if you're not Amish, you're English. So this is sort of a euphemism for people that were not part of the church, even though we know that most of the churches were made up of non-Jewish people. So it's the word, sometimes also that word ethnikos is translated as nations. So it just depends on the context. You have to look at the whole context of that word and how it's being used.
But nations of worldly things, not godly things, right?
I'm trying to think of the, like sometimes you have a phrase in the Bible where it say, go out to the nations, and it's that word ethnikos. You could say go out to the Gentiles, but it's a broader message. So you have to look at the context of, what, how it's being used in a certain phrase. So in this context, it's basically saying there's, much of first, second, third John is very, as we've said, very dualistic, very black and white. You're either with us or you're not with us. So you're either, a person of faith or you're a person of the nations. You're an outsider. You're not part of the household of faith. So that's what that word is getting at. Which is interesting. It would be translated as Gentiles because, as I said, most of these people would not have been Jewish believers. Some of them would, but the vast majority of these people would, at this point, have been Gentile believers that have been converted to Christianity.
They haven't been shown the truth then, is that why? Or they hadn't had an opportunity to receive the good news or the truth, love and truth, and
The people that he's talking to as outsiders here, they either hadn't had the opportunity, or they may. I mean, it may be just an inclusive term for people who are not part of the church, and it may be even include these people who were part of the church but have left the church, have gone out from us, as he says, is the way he says it.
so there's both, yeah.
But if you take that whole verses 5 through 8 as kind of a pericope, a section, it says, beloved, in this translation, beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the friends, that is, for the believers, even though they are strangers to you. So even people who come to help, if they are speaking the truth and doing the loving thing, they are friends. They're part of the movement. They have testified, even though they're strangers to you, they have testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on in a manner worthy of God. So take care of them, help them along their way, feed them and house them. And then when they go on to the next town, maybe give them some food or money for the journey. So send them on in a manner worthy of God, for they began their journey for the sake of Christ, accepting no support from non-believers. So when they left to do this, they were doing it as a mission from church to church. And so they have accepted hospitality from us here. We sent them on their way. They got on their journey. They got to you. Now you need to take care of them as they go on further. These are kind of missionary helpers that we're not sure what they were doing as they moved kind of from church to church, whether they were teaching or leading or, came to just help do, kind of a mission trip, that we would call it that today.
But they weren't doing it to make them fearful. They were just sorting them out as far as the kinds of people that would fit in the church. Is that what you mean? They're not. So you're not welcoming some people, is what I understand. Those that don't believe the way you do, but it's a little confusing.
Well, again, we have to narrow the focus and remember this is not, we don't read this and take this literally for what we should do in Lincoln City regarding anybody who comes to us. To put it kind of in modern words, it would be like, okay, we've got a UCC church in Lake Oswego.
Oh, okay.
And so the pastor of Lake Oswego is going to send some people down here to do some work in our church. And so they send a letter saying, please know that these people who are coming to you are coming from our church, and they're, UCC people, and they affirm the same things. And we're saying they understand, things about Jesus. They're loving people. So give them hospitality and help them, because then they're going to go from you down to the church down in, Brookings. They're going to go on down the coast, so send them on their way that way. So it's sort of, again, kind of an accompanying letter of recommendation, where he's saying, be hospitable to those who are part of us, but also be wary when you have someone who comes in and they don't have this letter of recommendation, you don't know where they're coming from, and they say, oh, I'm a Christian and I want to help you. You say, okay, great. And then they start saying, oh, I'd like to teach a class in which I tell everybody that this whole idea that Jesus was a human person is just nonsense. Jesus was this kind of spiritual, magical person that that tricked us into thinking he was real, but he didn't really live. And we don't. And by the way, we don't have to love each other. Forget that love nonsense. If someone comes in starting doing that, then the church is being encouraged to say, yeah, we're not going to let you teach that nonsense here. And we're also not going to keep letting you hang out here and enjoy our hospitality. You should probably go down the road somewhere.
A verse that just leaped off the pages for me right now for today, is verse 4. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth.
Yeah.
Well,
And,
that's all about today.
right.
Me, today, my
Yeah.
children.
Yeah. Yeah. You could certainly, and that's the beauty of scripture. You can take something like that and personalize it and think about your children, your
Yeah.
specific children, your grandchildren, people, this is the elder. He's talking to the whole church. And
I
he's
realize
saying,
that, but it spoke to me.
yeah. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about scripture is you can read something like that. I did that, back in the day when we wrote letters. I can't remember where it is, but somewhere Paul, I think in a couple of his letters, he says, prepare at the end of the letter, he says, prepare a room for me because I intend to spend some time with you, soon. And so when I was in the Air Force and I would send a letter home to my parents, I would often just put that scripture on the end of it. Go look it up. Prepare a room for me. Ha ha, Mike. But it worked.
And there too, you could say that there's sometimes you meet somebody that is a stranger, but you seem to just know that person and the kind of person they are. And maybe just showing that those are the people to look for, that are going to be your friends because it's likeness or whatever. But there's certain people you just click with.
Right. Right. And I think, again, part of it is clearly there's a mandate in all of Scripture and from Jesus to care for the stranger. And so again, how do we balance that overarching idea of welcoming, when you think of our church or our own lives, how do we welcome in the stranger, the homeless, the outcast, and give them that loving home? But then again, if that person is, it's not like they're saying only be nice to Christians,
Right.
or only be nice to people or people that are like you. He's saying in this specific situation, like when we have normal church, when everybody's there, we don't have someone standing at the door saying, okay, we've got 3 questions to ask you. What do you think about Jesus? We're just like, come on in. Everyone is welcome. We love everyone. But then over time, if you have a person and we've been fortunate, and I don't know, I have been in some churches where there have been some real conflicting personalities who really came on strong.
We've had it.
In trying to lead churches astray. And a church I served in Kansas had a whole group. There was I won't say the denomination, but there was a denomination of a church there in town that closed down. And so it was a sizable church when it closed down, but there were probably about 20 families with young kids who then came to our church before Carrie and I were there. And the church was like, this is great, young families and people want to teach Sunday school, and they got their kids here, and the church was really growing, and there was all these people. Well, pretty soon those people were in positions of leadership and authority and power. And long story short, the pastor and a couple elders had gone to a general assembly. They were gone, and they had a board meeting, and the people on the board made a motion, and the motion passed, and they voted to leave the disciples. Thankfully, there were some trusted elders in the church that were trustees and others who said, no, you can't do that. Just because you have the votes in the board to decide to leave the denomination when our pastor is not here and when the chair of our elders is not here. You can't do that. And so there was a big kerfuffle that went on for quite a time. And eventually those people either decided to leave or were told, you know, if you want to be part of this church, that's great, but we're not going to become that denomination. We're a Disciples of Christ church and we're staying that way. And if you want to be a disciple, great. If you don't, go start another church, which they did. And so it does happen where one or two people will come in and try to take over. And before you know it, hey, what happened? We just lost our faith community here.
We've had the occasion in our church to literally go ask a couple not to come back.
Yeah. And that's
We
a
had to.
horrible thing to have to do. But it's just the same as when a church maybe has to say to a minister, we love you, but you need to find another job.
Yeah. And we've had to do that too.
Yeah, I mean it's hard and it hurts because we're a family. It hurts the family, but you know sometimes things have to be done because it's the right thing to do. Yeah, as difficult as it may be. Any other thoughts about first, second, or third John? It's been sort of a whirlwind tour through these short books. I've enjoyed it because I have preached on occasion from First John, but I think I said in the introduction, I've never really studied any of these three books at any length. So it's been very interesting for me just to look at these books individually and kind of pull some meaning out of them and some understanding about what it means to follow
Did
Jesus.
you say that they were not all written by the same person, correct?
There's lots of debate, but the consensus is that there was someone who wrote First John and may have written Second and Third John. So you could be looking at one person who wrote all three. I tend to believe, and other scholars I agree with, tend to believe that there was one who wrote First John, and then the same person wrote these two, wrote Second and Third John, a different person. So you'd have two writers for the three books. So the consensus seems to be there was someone who wrote the Gospel of John, a completely different person that wrote Revelation, a completely different person that wrote First John, and a fourth person that wrote Second and Third John is what seems to make sense to me.
And why John?
I think, again, when we talked in the introduction about just the importance of attaching a name to, because even the Gospel of John doesn't have the name John in it at all. Right. Even when it's talking about the Apostle John, it says the disciple whom Jesus loved.
Yeah.
So yeah, but just attaching that name to this sort of community, this sort of school of thought, because there are many themes and some similar language that is picked up from John's Gospel in these three letters. And even a little bit that's picked up in Revelation from these three. So it's kind of, you could say that this sort of comes out of the school of John, because there are some kind of themes held in common. Love being the major one, to the real test of Christianity, particularly in these three books, is, are you loving one another? That's the bottom line. Love one another, which is a pretty good standard for us all to try to achieve. Anything else tonight?
You give a perhaps just an opinion on John 3:16,
the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 16. We're not studying the Gospel of John, Dee. You mean my understanding of it is you just have to kind of pull it all apart, deconstruct it and reconstruct it. And the idea behind that, again, is that to believe in Jesus is not to believe things about him. It is that verbal, are you faithing? Are you following Jesus? God so loved the world that he gave his son, that whoever follows him will have that eternal life. Again, we talked about that because it came from First John.
Yeah, there's no,
Eternal has nothing to do with chronology.
Right.
It's not living a long time after you die. It's how is your life characterized? Are
Okay.
you living as a follower of Jesus? And the test in both John and in these letters would be, are you loving other people?
Yeah.
Primarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
that's where I thought. Thank you.
So we'll have a couple Tuesdays off, and the 23rd, we will start the Andy Griffith series. And I think, again, we'll do that Tuesday mornings and Tuesday evenings and see kind of how that works out. I need to do some little tests on my own. I don't think it's going to be like a copyright issue for us to view that. I can share it and stream it from my Netflix, and we can all watch it together and discuss the episode. But because of copyright, I won't be recording the sessions, because then I think that would be a problem to put it on YouTube under the auspices of our Bible study. If it's just us sharing it together without any kind of profit motive, I don't think that'll be an issue. But I'm gonna
Did you
check
not
on that.
buy the rights to use it though?
no.
Oh, I thought you had actually bought, paid for the right.
I had the DVDs. I had my own DVDs the first time we did it, but I had like a limited. I don't have like all of the Andy Griffith Show on DVD. I just had a limited couple of seasons that I used this time. And when we started it a year ago, I was actually streaming it from, I think it was from Netflix at the church.
Oh,
Yeah. And there's not, I think it's the same like with the music that I use, as long as we are not saying, okay, we're going to do this Andy Griffith Bible study, and to participate, you got to give Pastor Mike $20 a pop to do this, and then I pocket that. That's going to be a copyright infringement, where it wouldn't be doing it in this context. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for your questions and your thoughts on these letters from John, and I look forward to the Andy Griffith study,
Okay,
and see some, if not all of you, Thursday night.
yeah, and we missed you being here.
I missed you all too, and I appreciated Dee giving me some information on the prayer concerns, and giving me a wrap up of how things went. We had a good council meeting on Sunday. Carol and Dee were there, and Steve did a good job of chairing the meeting, and everything went just fine.
Good.
Yeah,
You got my minutes?
I did see that. I'm still on vacation.
Oh,
I'll look at all the email. I've looked at some email and other stuff. I've started with I can look at that Wednesday. I'll look at that Wednesday. But I did see him come through.
But
All
I got
right.
an email today that ties in. I will send it to you, Pastor Mike, because it's all about baseball
All right.
and what that means to the travel industry and the like. And I thought of you specifically.
I tell you, I've got a friend who lives in Atlanta now, and one of my friends, another friend, is doing his sabbatical this year. And part of his sabbatical is just to go to the All-Star game with me and the other friend. So I'm hoping to go to the All-Star game in Atlanta in July this year. And his sabbatical will pay for most of that expense, which is really nice. But
Wonderful.
we'll see how the season goes.
Good luck with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Take care.
you too.
Too.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Pastor Mike.
Hey.
Bye-bye.